Okay, I figure we're just gonna walk into the site now. Hi, welcome to Tzippori. My name is Abby. I'm very excited to be touring in Tzippori here with you today. You might not know the name Tzippori because that is a Hebrew name. Sometimes in English we refer to it as Sepphoris. Tzippori is, I would say, one of the most exciting sites that you can visit in the Galilee today, which is very often overlooked. What's so exciting about it? This was the capital of the Jewish world. Basically, after Jerusalem for a time, it was the capital of the Galilee in the Roman period. This place was extremely famous. It's a place that's mentioned in many texts, or certainly mentioned many times in a lot of ancient Jewish texts. It's most famous for the fact that the Mishnah was compiled here in Tzippori by Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi, that's Rabbi Judah the Prince, at the end of the 2nd century. So when archaeologists are going to come back, almost 2,000 years later, excavating this place, we're going to find a lot of interesting connections between what we know about from texts to what you can actually find in the material remains of this place. Now we are headed down to the synagogue, which is going to be right down the stairs. And as we walk, we're going to have the privilege of seeing, first of all, a lot of local nature. The park itself put in local plants. So we have a fig tree. Over here, we have red pomegranate flowers. We have the mastic tree over here. We even have like baby grapes that are growing everywhere. And as I walk down, I already have this connection to the Galilee of today, because right over the steps, we see a view of 2 small Jewish towns that were built in this area, sort of as a throwback to the time when it was really Jewish. There's a far one on the top of the hill over there called Beit Rimon. And underneath it, this very close one is called Matthiyahu. So for me, it's sort of this interesting juxtaposition of ancient Galilee with new Galilee, because also here, the largest building that you see right on top of the hill over there is the synagogue. So start at the synagogue in Tzippori, which is just facing the synagogue of Matthiyahu, continued tradition of thousands of years, Judaism here in the Lower Galilee. Let's go. I'm sorry, this is also pretty amazing. Can we point it out? Is it okay?
Sure, you can.
Amazing, because we don't often get to see the prickly pear blooming. In fact, I feel like I haven't seen it blooming in years, maybe because there was like a terrible disease that was attacking them. So we had like quite a few years that there were none growing in nature. And this is a prickly pear, in Hebrew called? Tzabar. So why is it famous in the US? Well, first of all, because there's a brand of hummus that is manufactured, if I'm allowed to say, that's called tzabar, because this is basically what we think of Israelis. The fruit the flower will eventually grow into a fruit that's going to have a lot of prickles on the outside, but really soft and sweet on the inside. And that is why Israelis are called tzabarim, because inside they're very soft, but on the outside they're very prickly. So you have to watch your fingers so you don't get spiked. But this one is it's just amazing. Like visually, it's amazing. It has full of like yellow flowers, and it's going to make a real comeback after the plight of the tzabarim. Okay, I hear noise coming from inside. So let's go around to the other side. We'll start over there and then we'll come inside. Okay. So according to Jewish tradition, God gave the Jewish people the Torah on Mount Sinai about 3,500 years ago. And that Torah was a written Torah, written on scrolls. We have some very ancient examples of those scrolls. But alongside that written Torah was an oral text. The idea of the oral text is to keep the Torah alive, because what's written is written in stone and it can never be changed. But the oral Torah is something that has a lot more flexibility and was a way to enable Judaism to deal with new situations and different things that would arise throughout the generation. So in ancient times, not only was that Torah oral, but there was even a prohibition against writing it down. So it was passed down from father to son and mother to daughter for hundreds of years. Sometimes I liken it to a recipe. So if you have a recipe that's written down, it can tell you 5 eggs and 3 cups of sugar and some flour. And that would be like something that's written down in a written Torah. But to learn an oral Torah with a master, a teacher, or your parents is like going into the kitchen with your mom or with your grandma. She's going to show you not just what's written down, but she's going to show you the soul of that recipe, exactly how to do it, how it should look, how things should be done. And basically that's how Judaism was maintained for thousands of years, until after the destruction of the Second Temple in the year 70. And that's when things came to a bit of a pivot. Many Jews are exiled at that point. The Jewish connection to Jerusalem and the temple is interrupted. And the heart of the Jewish nation moves from Jerusalem to the Galilee. And that oral Torah, actually by decrees of the Romans, is in danger of being interrupted. The giving over the tradition is in danger of being interrupted, and that Torah is in danger of being forgotten. In the middle of the 2nd century, a great leader, as I mentioned his name before, Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi, Rabbi Judah the Prince, realizes that because he lives in a relatively peaceful time, that this is the moment that has to be seized in order to preserve that tradition. And he collects all of these oral traditions and he organizes it into something that's called the Mishnah. The Mishnah actually means to teach or to learn or to say by heart. So everything that had been said by heart ahead of time, he's going to, before that, he's going to collect, and eventually it's going to be written down. But again, the idea was to organize it in a certain way that could be easily remembered and preserved for generations. So Tzippori is the place where that first amazing work of Jewish scholarship is going to occur. So that's what's most famous about Tzippori. I am standing by the doorway of the Synagogue of Tzippori. It's only one synagogue of Tzippori that we know that archaeologists have found. I say that because there's mention in the Talmud of 18 synagogues existing in Tzippori. And we're just going to visit one. And actually, we know for a fact that the synagogue we're going to visit today is not one of those 18. Well, how do I know? Because that material is referring to the funeral of Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi. And this synagogue, we know, would have been built after his time period. So we're going to be seeing a synagogue that's already 3rd or 4th century and not 1st or 2nd. But I'm starting here. You see, he already has this beautiful lintel, a mezuzah in Hebrew. And if you look over here, you can even see that we're going to step over this threshold. And the fact that you have these imprints over here show us that there was a door and that they could close it and they could even lock it. And the fact that it's so wide and so vast, so an archaeologist would come here and understand that this building is not a normal house, because something much grander, because we're entering the synagogue. So I use that Greek expression synagogue. It is actually a very literal translation of the Hebrew word Beit Knesset. Beit meaning a house, and Knesset means a place where people gather. We know today, right? The Knesset of Israel is its parliament. It's not a place where people come to pray. It's a place where people come to talk, argue, get heated up, but really meet each other. And that is the idea of a place where Jews come together to worship. We don't call it a house of prayer. We call it a house of gathering, of assembly. And that would actually be reflected in synagogue architecture, which actually this is not a great example of it. The fact that in a synagogue, people don't sit facing forward, they sat facing around. They were facing each other. Reflecting the most important part of the synagogue is the meeting with your fellow Jew, and not necessarily just your meeting with the divine above. So with that, I invite you to come into the synagogue. We have a little bit of musical background. This in itself would already be part of the original layout. You can see there's, on the floor, you can see it's a cement floor. And in Tzippori, we're going to see lots of places where the mosaic is filled in, which means they might have found a small piece of mosaic, but they know that this is where the building was, so they assume that it would have gone all the way around. So we're going to head on in. Today is that instead of walking through and starting on top, we're actually going to start in the bottom where people would have come into this building. So come on in. Okay, and the most remarkable thing about this synagogue is its mosaic floor, which is in many different panels. Again, you could see that when this building was destroyed, the roof collapsed because of an earthquake, and a lot of the mosaic floor was destroyed, but there's actually still a ton that you can see. Looking around, first of all, I would point out that, come on over here. And this is the most important thing that we should learn about life. There is a whole carpet over here that has medallions with inscriptions. These inscriptions are in Hebrew, whereas a lot of the other inscriptions are in Greek. These are actually the donor plaque of the synagogue. There was obviously some fundraising involved in here, and people who donated money were remembered in favor over here on this whole strip of dedicatory inscriptions. Okay, and we can start looking at these amazing panels. Okay, so we're gonna start right in the middle. The panel in the middle, is of the zodiac. So what we're looking at is, you can see in the center, you have a picture of a chariot with horses pulling it, and you see the sun and the moon. And around it, around that very center, are the 12 signs of the zodiac that are marking the 12 months of the year. And if you go one further out, you've got 4 corners. And the 4 corners are representing the 4 seasons. And if you look carefully, you can see the various seasons, even from the way people are dressed. You see in the corner, she's really keeping herself covered. She's got to be warm because over there are the months of winter. Whereas here, you even have the wheat that shows the reaping at the end of the growing season.
It's written Tammuz.
And it's written Tammuz. Kufat Tammuz, the summer season. Yeah. The interesting thing about the Pisces over here is that if you look at the Hebrew, first of all, it's written strangely. And second of all, the Gimel is exactly backwards. Okay, sign that could be that whoever was actually making this mosaic and these words in Hebrew wasn't so familiar of how they should look. So we see in each corner, so if we said the center is the sun and the moon, around the center are the 12 signs of the zodiac, and in the 4 corners are actually the signs of the various seasons. So right underneath us, we can see the time of spring, Nisan. I imagine that you're pretty surprised that in the center of a synagogue is a mosaic floor with a portrayal of a zodiac. But the truth of the matter is, it's not so uncommon in the Galilee in this period. So we have that zodiac in other synagogues, in Beit Alpha, in Tiberias, and we actually have in other places as well that are not in the Galilee.
Jericho.
In Jericho, in En Gedi.
Yes.
It doesn't appear, it's not pictorial, but the names are mentioned. So again, it's this very strange question of, what is this? Is there a zodiac to Israel? Are we really controlled by astrology and the stars? A lot of the sages believed that in fact that Israel does have a zodiac, and that there is some influence, not necessarily the stars' influence, but rather that there's some kind of destiny, a goral that we say in Hebrew. But on the other hand, we also believe, and back then the sages believed as well, that we have free choice. So there might be a destiny that's already written, but certain actions can help us change that destiny. So it certainly is interesting to be inside a synagogue from what we said is one of the most important sites in Lower Galilee, Tzippori, and discover that the center of it is dominated by what we think of as a pagan concept, pagan images. And there's a few different ways we can think of this. First of all, it certainly is true that it represents a calendar. Also, according to Jewish sources, each month has a name and has some kind of sign. There are references to this in various Jewish texts. For example, in the Kabbalah, there's talk about what happens under each astrological sign, and the possible spiritual ramifications of things that happen in certain signs. Another way of looking at it is that it's just a standard decoration that one might find in a place. So we can think of it really as a calendar that represents what's going on in the here and the now. Maybe even related to our own decisions, like our own thoughts, how the pathways that we choose in our own lives. Is it going to be according to a sign or what we make out of it? Maybe it's even an indication that we should remember that maybe there's a sign that we're born under, but we still can and should choose our own paths. So if this section represents the present, we can move to the bottom. And I call it the bottom because everything here is facing this direction. And what we have here are some biblical scenes. So you can clearly see that a lot of these biblical scenes have been wiped out. They are described in Greek inscriptions. But this first one over here, you can definitely see the image of two people, right? And they're holding the reins to an animal, which is probably a donkey. And we assume here that what we're seeing in these images is the binding of Isaac. Why are we so sure? Well, first of all, it makes sense, right? The story is that when Abraham, our forefather, he had an agreement with God, he was sent to a certain place, and at the foot of the mountain, it says in the sources that he left behind his young men, his servants, and he continued ahead only with his son, Isaac. And he will reach the top of the mountain, which we will later know as Mount Moriah, later still become known as the Temple Mount. And there, he binds Isaac to an altar, ready to sacrifice him. And at that point, we know that the sacrifice doesn't happen. It was just God's way of testing Abraham. But what we can clearly see here is that these servants were left behind, and that is basically how it's described in the biblical text. Underneath it, we have another picture, another carpet, which we assume would have been three angels coming to visit Abraham and his wife Sarah. Again, the idea of this promise, this connection between God and his descendants in the form of Abraham, and later on Isaac, and later on Jacob, and later on the nation of Israel, later to be known as the Jewish people. So if the center is the present, this is the past, what already happened, this connection. And now we're going to go to the upper part of the mosaic, which also has very familiar motifs. Okay, so I would like to, start in the very center here. You can see an entranceway with columns on each side and a door. So we can assume that this is either the entrance to the temple of the past, or maybe even the tabernacle. On each side, we see a depiction of, well, you can see that one is the far one is clearer. You see the menorah that would have stood in the temple. With how many lights does it have? 7? 7. And we see trumpets on the side, and we see some kind of receptacle holding the lulav and the etrog and the aravot, the 4 species that we use on the festival of Sukkot. Above them, we see a wreath with a little bit of a Greek inscription. On either side's lions. Lion, which is often represents Judah. So it's the Lion of Judah or the Lion of Jerusalem. The bottom panels of this carpet represent some of the various sacrifices, whether it is the bikurim, the pointing over there with the birds and the fruit. So that's the first harvest that we bring in the spring in Shavuot, or the showbreads in the center, or even right over here we have these daily offerings of these things that are written in Hebrew. So if you look right over here, we have shemen, the oil, solet, the wheat, and the trumpets that would have accompanied those offerings. And further up, we can actually see a basin over there. This would have represented the consecration of the tabernacle. The interpretation of the mosaic, that this represents the present, that was the past, and this is the future, what the Jewish people eventually aspire to. A reconnection to the temple in Jerusalem as a as a cultural center, as a religious center, and even as a national center, where once again the Jewish people will be able to rally behind their common practices and their common goal and their common God, and be united in their nationhood and in their worship according to the Torah. So people who would pray here, this is what they have, in front of their eyes as they sat here to both pray and, as we said before, just to meet and discuss the affairs of their village. So I'd like to be able to see here this sort of imprint of something that's even imprinted right in all of our Jewish DNA. This connection to our choices of the present, this connection back to our forefathers, and the connection between them and God, and a period when all Jewish people lived in the land and rallied behind one Torah, one temple, and one peoplehood, and the aspirations as a Jewish people to have that secure future, knowing that we're coming from a common past and we're moving towards a common goal in the future, where Jewish people will be reunited. In just a few minutes, we are going to be entering the Citadel of Tzipori. This is one of the site's most iconic elements. First of all, because this tower has been standing here for thousands of years. Not exactly the way we see it right now, but we see different architectural elements that correspond to the different time periods in Israel and the different rulers who were here. So we know that in the time of the Talmud, there was a tower here of some kind, a Roman garrison tower. And we know that it was somewhat destroyed. We know that the Crusaders were here as well. And then we built it. You see, this is pretty typical. This arch over the entranceway. And further up, we're going to have a part that was built in a much more modern period in the last 500 years, some point during the Ottoman period. Now, fascinatingly, if you start walking around the building, which we're going to do, come and have a look, you can see that a lot of these stones are not in primary usage. What do I mean? That they were not originally standing here. I'm going to stop at my favorite one. Look at this fabulous corner. Enormous, enormous stones. You see them 1, 2, and 3. Huge boxes, which have this decoration, which obviously was not meant to be in this building. If you come to the side, you can actually see how wide it is. Okay? So if you've ever seen this item in real life, you would know what it is. Maybe. This box is called a sarcophagus. And this is an ancient burial coffin that's made out of stone that was fairly popular for wealthier people who were living in the early Roman period. So about 2,000 years ago, if you had a little bit of money or you were an important person, you might be buried in a sarcophagus. The word itself comes from Greek. It means an eater of flesh, because you could put your body in here and it would decompose. And someone could come later, a member of your family could come later and take the bones and rebury them in an ossuary, or as we call it in Hebrew, according to Greek, a gluskema. But the Latin word that we use is an ossuary. It's just as big as the bones. But I feel like the Citadel itself, even the outside architecture, tells a little bit of the story, the continuous story that comes from something being built, then being destroyed, and those original pieces are going to be used again to rebuild something amazing that is going to last here for many, many, many generations. Let's go up. We're headed up to the top of the Citadel. It's pretty steep. It's a long walk up, but the view will be worth it. what? I spoke too soon. Yeah, there's wind. We have a fabulous view of the lower Galilee. Now we're facing towards the north. So as you can see, the Galilee itself is built of a series, or composed of a series of valleys and mountains, The one that's closest to us is this mountain range over here called the Turan Mountain. And then behind it is the Beit Netofa Valley. Beyond that, we're seeing the Yodfat Mountains. Yodfat Mountains, Hare Yodfat. Yodfat Atzmo is like over there. And I think even from this view, we have some interesting thoughts about the way ancient settlements were. So if you look at this little hilltop over here, this is Mitzpeh Hoshaya, or the hilltop over there, you see another Jewish kibbutz called Beit Rimon. But the edge of the valley over here, you can see the Bedouin village of Rumat al-Heb, and over here, Bedouin village of Kfar Manda. And each of these is really built in a very historical fashion. In the most ancient times, the Jewish villages are mostly situated at the top of the hill. And also in modern times, when this area was settled more intensively, it was at the top of the mountains. The traditional Arab villages, however, are always at the edge of the mountain. The idea being that the whole flat area in the valley was left for agriculture, for traditional agriculture, and the village itself wouldn't take up any of that space. That is why the villages are always at the very, very edge of the mountains. And between us and the next mountain range you see over there is a highway. See the highway? You could see a red bus driving through and some trucks. Today, this is one of Israel's most important east-west routes of the north. This is Highway 77 that leads from the main highway, Highway 6, to Tiberias and further north towards the rest of the country. Amazingly, this exact route was used for the past thousands of years by travelers. Why? Because traveling across mountains is difficult, and traveling through valleys was not difficult, which could even may help us understand why this spot of Tzippori was chosen as a good place to settle. Now I'm reading you from the Talmud Megillah, 6a. It's referring to what was possibly a biblical city that was in this area called Kitron. The city of Kitron that is mentioned in the Bible is the city of Tzippori. Why was it called Tzippori? Because it sits on top of a mountain like a bird. The Hebrew word for bird is Tzippor, and the site is called Tzippori. So imagine if you were living here 2,000 years ago and you wanted to know if there were any threats coming across your road, this would be an excellent place to have, well, a citadel, much like the one we see was built here. You could watch the road and who came across it. So if you want to hear probably about the most famous people across the road, excuse me, I'm going to jump forward in time to the time of the Crusaders. In the year 1187, there was going to be a major battle between the Christian Crusaders and the Ayyubids, the Arabs who are controlling the land at that time. And the Crusaders are actually going to start from right over here in Sepphoris. They have a spring on the other side of the town. They're going to drink water here, and they're planning on marching for a day across that Route 77, more or less, towards Tiberias. And there they're going to drink water before they set off to battle. Unfortunately for the Crusaders, didn't have a good understanding of geography or climate in the Middle East. They were wearing their full battle gear, metal armor. Their horses were outfitted with metal armor, and they were walking across the Holy Land in the height of summer in July. They became parched with thirst, discovered some of the fountains, the springs along the way were poisoned, and from exhaustion, they were not able to continue all the way to Tzippori. They stopped at a place called the Horns of Hittin, where they already met the Ayyubid army, who saw that they were already thirsty and exhausted. And basically what they did is the Ayyubids thought they would just wait it out until those Crusaders melted in their own armor. They set the fields on fire, And by the time they went into battle, the Crusaders were completely exhausted, and that is how Saladin and the Ayyubids were able to easily overtake their army and throw those Crusaders out of the Holy Land for the next while. Going back to where we are right over here, again, we're in the heart of the Lower Galilee, okay? So we're just gonna pan around here for the 180 because I want you to be able to see that when we look directly west, you see a tall mountain range, and that range is known as the Carmel Mountains, and there's actually a tower on top, and that tower on top is the University of Haifa Tower. Actually, there's a really fascinating museum inside called the Hecht Museum of Archaeology. It's on the first floor. And going a little further north, you can see other tall buildings of Haifa. Just pan across over here for a minute, okay? So we're just taking a moment to look towards the southeast of us. When Tzippori begins to grow into a large village or even a small city, which reached in its heyday even 40,000 inhabitants, they needed to bring more water to the town. And the source of the water was springs in the villages over there. What we're looking at is today the town or the city of Nazareth and other villages underneath it, Rainer, Mashad, and Kafar Kana. So there was actually a water system that was delivering water from the springs over there all the way to this town of Tzippori over here. A feat of Roman engineering. Shalom. Okay, so we are headed into, I think, one of the first buildings that was reconstructed for viewers to come see it right over here in Tzippori. And we're going to be heading into what is known as the House of Dionysus. I actually think this is the best place to stand in order to be able to see it. Okay, so you go over there. We are standing above one of the most amazing mosaics that you can see. Tzippori itself is basically a town of mosaics, something that really alludes to its great wealth. But here, for sure, we're standing in somebody's house who was very, very fancy. So if you look over here, what we can see in the center, or the whole theme of this particular mosaic, is a drinking contest between Dionysus, who is the god of wine, and Hercules, a courageous hero. And you can see all these different images of people who are more dressed or less dressed, all kinds of figures that we know from Greek mythology that might have been surprising to find in a Jewish village like Tzippori. The room that we're in now would have been known as the triclinium, which in itself is the word hints at what this room is used for. It's the all-purpose room of the house. This is where parties are held. This is where people meet. The word triclinium means 3 sofas, right? Three, clinium, like a recliner even, someplace you could recline. And if you look carefully, you'll notice that there are 3 white spots in our mosaic. Okay, you see them? 1, 2, 3. Whoever planned the mosaic and who planned the room knew that those spaces, those spaces are going to be designated for the clinium, for the sofas. So why bother putting a picture of their story underneath the sofas? What did we use them for? Well, to eat while reclining. In the Roman period, it's just about 2,000 years ago in Israel. Actually, it's from 63 BCE until the Roman Empire becomes Christian in 324 CE. These parties are common amongst the nobility, amongst the wealthy people. So what you would do is you would have this very, very lavish meal fed to you by maids and other servants, where you could eat and enjoy while sitting on a sofa or reclining on a sofa. And once you've eaten enough and you feel like you are stuffed and you could eat no more, a maidservant would come with a bowl and a feather, and she would tickle you until you were able to vomit. And once you vomited and cleared your stomach, well, you could start the party over with a great deal more of lavish banqueting. So even in the house itself, you can see that whole concept might have been a little bit of foreign to traditional Jews of the time of the Mishnah, and obviously the images in the Mosaic, these images of mythology, might have been a little strange. So who lived in this house? It's a good question. Let's look. Maybe we have one hint who used to live here. Maybe not. Now you're gonna follow. So, yeah. Once we're closer, we can really see how beautifully this mosaic is made. It has over 1 million tiles in it in 22 different colors. A lot of these colors can be found naturally. Oh, sorry. What is a mosaic? You need to know what a mosaic is, right? I should have said that before. Okay. So what is a mosaic? A mosaic is a picture that is created by using small stones. So no part of this is painted. It's put together by tiny stones called tessera. Each of them in a different color. And a lot of times the mosaic can retain its color even for thousands of years because that's the color of the natural stone. So all these different blacks and yellows and reds and browns are naturally occurring. You can get them from different parts of Israel itself. There are two colors which are a little bit trickier. That's the green and the blue, which could be imported at extreme expense. Or sometimes there was a little bit of cheating that's done and they're made out of glass, which is sometimes the case over here. Now, I said before that maybe when we're standing on this side, we'll have a little hint as to who lived in this house. So I'm going to show you our great beauty, the woman known as the Mona Lisa of the Galilee. By the way, I'm sure whoever lived in this house 1,800 years ago did not refer to her as the Mona Lisa of the Galilee, but today we call her that because she is so beautiful, and because wherever you're standing, it kind of looks like she's looking at us. So some scholars believe that this might be the face of Venus or Aphrodite, goddess of love, goddess of beauty. Others say, you know what, this could actually be the face of the woman who lived in this house. We don't know. So her secret is safe on the mosaic floor. We can come, we can admire, we can see the Cupid to her side, and know that maybe this is what she looked like. So I want to tell you a story that occurs in the Midrash. So it is a legend from the time of the Talmud. It's a legend that dates back 1600 years. It's a story about Rabbi Yosef ber Chalafta, Rabbi Joseph, the son of Chalafta, and a noble woman. Now, we know that Rabbi Yossi lived here in Tzippori, and we know this is a picture of a noble woman in Tzippori or Aphrodite, so it could be between these two figures. And the story goes like this. The noble woman came to Rabbi Yossi, and over here we see that there's a meeting between the Jews and the non-Jews, and they're going to discuss philosophy. And she says to him, tell me something. What has God been doing since he created the world in 6 days? Because if he created it in 6 days, then since creation, he's been pretty bored with nothing to do. And Rabbi Yossi said, well, since then, he spends all of his time making couples, because everybody know for having a happily married couple is as difficult as creating a miracle like parting the seas. And she said, that sounds a little strange. I'm going to show you, I can do it just as well. And she brought before her 1,000 of her slaves and 1,000 of her maidservants, and she divided them into couples, all in one night. And then the next morning, she discovered that there had been a lot of, I would say, domestic unrest in that particular night. One came with a broken leg, one came with a wound in his head. They were all cursing, they were all screaming, I don't want to be with this one, I want to be with that one. And she said to Rabbi Yossi, your Torah is true. Apparently this is a hard thing to do, and Rabbi Yossi says, right, since the creation of the world, God is making matches and keeping peace in homes. because that is extremely difficult. So if we look back at the story, again, it's a pretty unusual story. I wouldn't know that from matchmaking one could determine that the Torah is true or not. But that's not actually my point here. When I bring a story like that to Tzippori, I want to say we can look at these stories that were written down hundreds and hundreds of years ago and say what we can learn about the people who lived in this place. What was their day-to-day life like? It could be that a noblewoman who might live in a house like this, or not, could meet a sage and they could have a discussion between them about God even, about philosophy, about divinity, and they could agree with each other or disagree with each other, but the point was there was interaction between them. There is a meeting between worlds where the noblewoman, the matron, the noble matron of Roman descent or of Roman religion or culture could continue being who she is, and Rabbi Yossi could come and tell his own truth, and they could either agree or disagree with each other, but they could also live together in relative harmony in this place. Okay, so we are standing behind that triclinium, and from down here we can see that this house is composed of several different rooms. So we have the main room, and we have other bedrooms or quarters over here, possibly a kitchen over there. But over here, we're at one of my favorite parts of this house. Basically, you can see a white tiled floor with some black letters on it, and some kind of drainage system over here. And we understand that this is the toilet of the home. The word in Greek actually says hygia, meaning sanitation, or something that is sanatory. And this would have been a, flush toilet. What does that mean? You could come here to the privacy of the bathroom, do what you need to do, and then a maid or a servant could come and pour a jug of water and cause your refuse to flow right out of the house. So, who in the ancient world had a toilet? If you go to many of the large Roman cities from this time period, right? So about 2,000 years ago, 1,800 years ago, even in Israel, if you're in Beit She'an or if you're in Caesarea, you'll discover that there are public toilets called latrines where people could go to socialize while they are doing their important business. Whoever lived in this house, his business was private, and he was able to do it from the comfort of his own home. And this takes me back to the words of the Talmud and our friend, Rabbi Yosef ben Chalafta, who, as we said, was both born in Tzippori and lived in Tzippori. From the Gemara, the sages taught, who is wealthy? Anyone who gets pleasure from his wealth. And is the statement of Rabbi Meir. But Rabbi Tarfon said, a wealthy person is anyone who has 100 vineyards, 100 fields, 100 slaves working in them. Rabbi Akiva says, anyone who has a wife whose actions are pleasant. Rabbi Yossi says, anyone who has a bathroom close to his table. So for Rabbi Yossi, who lived here and, again, may or may not have ever visited this house, he did know that a wealthy person is somebody who has a bathroom right next to his table. Okay. Looking at Tzippori, we know that Tzippori was a pretty big town, about 40,000 people. It had an upper city and a lower city. During the development, the park refers to this area as the Jewish quarter. A lot of Tzippori was inhabited by Jews. Even the house of Dionysus that we just saw, despite the fact that we see many motifs from mythology, it also might be a Jewish house. So why they call this part the Jewish quarter? Well, for one thing, a lot of the pottery that was discovered here has inscriptions in Hebrew, and also has some pictures of menorot. But if you come a little bit closer, I can show you something that makes it a very an undeniably Jewish village. Okay, so what we're looking at now is an example of a Jewish ritual bath called a mikveh. Wherever you find a mikveh, you know automatically, or today at least archaeologists are 100% sure, that the identification of a ritual bath means that the people who use this place were Jewish. who lived here were Jewish. And beyond that, there were people to whom the whole idea of purity and impurity was consequential and important in their lives. So in this quarter, there are many mikvaot, many mikvahs, and people would have had these mikvaot right in their homes.
I see another one here.
You can see, we can recognize mikvah because the walls are plastered and because there are steps going down. Okay, so the way that a mikvah has to be built according to the sages, on the one hand, is precise the amount of water it needs to hold. It needs to hold a certain amount of water, what's called 40 sela of water, and practically speaking, you would have stairs going down and someplace that one could dunk themselves, sort of like a bathtub. But we do see different shapes of mikvah. Again, the way we know it is that it's big enough to have that amount of water. It has plaster on the walls and it has stairs going down. Mikvahs from this period can be seen in many different places. We often know them from Jerusalem, from the area around the Holy Temple. But the truth of the matter is, any place where a Kohen, members of the priestly families lived, would have mikvaot. Places that were producing certain things to be eaten in purity or would also have mikvaot. For example, we have places with olive presses. We know that olive oil was made in the Galilee and shipped to Jerusalem to be used in the temple. It would have been of prime importance that that oil should be made in a state of purity. Again, purity is not cleanliness or lack of cleanliness. It has to do with something that is more spiritual and a little bit more difficult to understand. But whoever was making olive oil and wanted to be pure, before they began their work in the morning, they would immerse themselves in the mikveh. So this here could be a sign that this quarter was inhabited by a lot of members of the priestly class. We know that even after the destruction of the temple, many Jews continued the adherence to these various laws and regulations of purity and non-purity. That's called tahara in Hebrew. And we also know of the various priestly families that became dispersed in the Galilee. And we know of one family, one clan, I would say, that actually settled here in Tzippori. Members of the Yedaya clan, Yedaya family, were living here in Tzippori, and they would have had need for a lot of mikvaot, and that's what we see here. So it's entirely possible that they were living in these houses, living in this village, and using this mikvah, or this type of mikvah. What makes a mikvah something that's very specific is its shape and the fact that the source of the water is natural. It's water that should be coming directly from the rain or directly from a spring. And that's what we see here in Tzippori. It's crazy, eh? So you can see that this approach is the less taken, less well maintained. It's like the secret entrance to the theater. We are standing in the theater of Tzippori. A lot of times in modern days, we sometimes call a half a theater an amphitheater. That's not correct. An amphitheater, the word amphi means double. It's actually, in Roman times or in Greek time, the amphitheater is what goes all the way around. Okay, so it's for a certain kind of entertainment. This is a theater. It is built for more refined entertainment. How do I know it's refined? Because everybody's sitting facing forward. This theater itself was built for about 4,500 people. So that is a lot of people that could have come into this place. It's always set up the same way with various levels of seating. So you have your cheap seats, your medium seats, and your expensive seats. people would come in actually at ground level and have the choice of either going up to the cheap seats or down into the expensive seats. In the front here, we have an orchestra. That's the flat area that I'm standing in now. This is the orchestra. In Roman period, they would actually have chairs set up here, and the VIPs could sit in the orchestra very, very close to the stage. A stage is, in the Roman theaters, always composed the same way. Here we have very few original parts left. So what you have is niches, and those niches would contain statues as decor. And in the back of the stage, you would have what was known as a scanai frons. So today we see sunshine, we see trees behind it, but in Roman period, you have a backdrop there. And the kind of entertainment that occurs here is some kind of theater. So it could be a play, it could be a comedy. Romans liked they liked stand-up, they like parodies, political parodies, and that's the kind of entertainment that would occur here. So the question is, again, we're sitting in a place where the Sanhedrin ruled Israel for hundreds of years. We're sitting in a place where many great sages lived. We're sitting in a place where the Oral Torah was collected. Why is there a theater here? Who used this theater? For one thing, we know that it wouldn't have existed if there wasn't some kind of pagan audience that was also attending. And the question is, did the sages attend the theater? Did the regular Jewish people, the ones who we saw who lived in the houses with the mikvaot, did they go to the mikvah in the morning, make some olive oil, and then come to the theater in the afternoon for some entertainment? We do know that the sages in the Talmud make references to theaters themselves. And they question, can you come to a theater? And basically their answer is, blessed is the man who never sat in the seat of scoffers. My friends, we are looking at seats of scoffers here. So the sages would have encouraged their Jewish brethren to spend their time in the study hall or at home with their children, rather than wasting their time watching low-level Roman entertainment. There is, however, an exception. In the case where there is actually more violent entertainment in amphitheater, which involved battles between man and man, between man and beast, there would be cases where the sages would encourage Jewish people to go and participate. What kind of case? In the case where one of the contestants, opponents, fighters was Jewish. And why were they encouraged to participate? Two reasons, both of them pretty terrible. The first reason is because apparently the crowd, with their booing or cheering, had some say on the outcome of the battle. So it could be that they would come to the amphitheater in order to encourage, give their thumbs up or their thumbs down to their opponent. And hopefully, if enough of the crowd gave their approval to the Jewish contestant, he could win and save his own life. And another reason was in a case that would have been worse than that, when the crowd did not vote for the Jewish contestant and he was killed, so somebody from the crowd could come back and give testimony to the family that their loved one had in fact been killed, and that would mean that their family would be able to mourn for their loved one, but also to go through the various stages of mourning and then move on. For example, the wife, having known that her husband was killed, could later on remarry and continue the generation of Jews even after their loved one was killed. What I do want to add is just even here in Tzippori, the juxtaposition between a theater, which is an installation of Roman culture, and other things, other small hints we saw of Roman culture here, living side by side with Jewish culture, with mikvaot, with the study of Torah, showed that these two things could be together and they had potential to exist harmoniously side by side at the same time. So we've mentioned Tzippori as being a very critical site in Jewish history. So the governing body of the Jewish people for many years was known as the Sanhedrin. And initially, the Sanhedrin would meet, and I'm talking about towards the end of the first millennium BCE, was meeting inside Jerusalem in the temple. In the year 70, towards the end of the Jewish people's great revolt against the Romans, Jerusalem is besieged, And a great scholar, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, sneaks out of the siege of Jerusalem and approaches the general of Vespasian. He understands that Jerusalem is going to be lost. Jerusalem is going to be destroyed. The Jewish people are going to be sent in diaspora. But he knows he needs some anchor to hold them together. He goes out and he says, I understand that Jerusalem is, or he implies that he understands Jerusalem is going to be gone. And he asks for one thing in its place. He says, Ten li et Yavne v'chachamea. Give me Yabne and its sages. And by this he meant, maybe you'll destroy the sticks and the stones and the buildings and the physicalness of the temple. But Judaism and the Jewish people and the Jewish nation will continue. And they'll continue rallied behind other leaders and other concepts. They'll continue as a nation behind the Torah, even if there's no temple. And initially the Sanhedrin left Jerusalem and was able to reconvene in Yavne. But in time, Judea, the land of Judea, after the Bar Kokhba revolt in the 2nd century, empties out of Jews. It says even there that the Romans sowed the fields with salt so that people could never replant there. And the center of the Jewish nation comes here to the Galilee. The Sanhedrin leaves Yavne and resettles in a small village called Usha. And from Usha, they travel to another place called Shfaram, which we saw before from the top of the Citadel. And from Shfaram, they travel to a place called Beit She'arim. And from Beit She'arim, they come here to Tzippori. So basically, this becomes the place where the Sanhedrin is set up. And Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi is the person we said who is going to lead to the collection of the Oral Torah in the 2nd century. And he was a truly great and unusual figure. He was born in the time when there were decrees against being Jewish, against performing Brit Milah, against keeping Shabbat, and against ordaining new rabbis. But when he's born, his parents said, should we give in to these decrees? And the answer was, of course not. If God has called on us to perform these commandments, we will do them. And they circumcise their brand new baby. And they get caught by the Roman authorities here in Israel, in the Galilee. And the Roman authorities at that point said, we're not going to deal with you. We're going to send you back to Rome, to Caesar. They're going to deal with you. And they set off across the sea towards Rome. And when they land on the other side, on the other shore, it says that they spent the night in an inn. And they met a family in the inn who had a baby born on the exact same day as their son, Judah. And that baby was named Antoninus, and a friendship was struck up between these two families. And when this Roman family heard about the plight of the Jewish family, they said, you know what? When you go tomorrow to see the Caesar, take our baby with you. We'll switch babies. So on the next day, the family of Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi goes to see the Caesar, but they're not carrying their baby. They have this baby, Antoninus. And they show him, they present him to the Caesar, who sees that the baby is complete. Nobody circumcised him. And the Caesar said, he basically threw them out of court. He said, this charge is ridiculous and it's of no meaning. And of course, they switched their babies back. Antoninus went back to his parents. Yehuda went back to his parents. And this is the beginning of a connection between these two very, very important characters. Rabbi Yehuda, who will eventually be called the Nasi, the Prince, and Antoninus, who will later become Caesar. We are now visiting the lower city of Tzippori, of Sepphoris. We're starting out here in this wonderful grid. We're in the center where the two main walkways meet each other. So we have going south to north, the Cardo, and over here going west to east, the Decamanus. All Roman cities are built according to this exact same grid. So if we saw at the top of the hill was where the Jewish quarter was, that's the more ancient Tzippori. Down here we already have the more modern building, which is going to happen later in the Roman period, starting in the end of the 1st centuries and going on the 2nd century, 3rd century into the Byzantine period, which begins in the 4th. So you can already see some very, very typical layout of the Roman city. Even the fact, the way that the stones are laid on a diagonal. Why on the diagonal? Because if we imagine Romans coming through here on chariots, their wheels won't sink in the spaces that are between the paving stones. And if we move a little further down, let's move a little further down. I want to show you. I don't know if you can be able to get this on camera, but you can actually see the grooves here that came from the wheels of chariots. So you can actually see the wear and tear on this Roman period cardo created by chariots coming through it. So this is also the main area of commerce. You would have shops on either side because the people would spend a lot of time shopping for their needs right here in the heart of the city. And that is going to take us to the most amazing public buildings that are located right here in the lower city of Tzippori. Okay, so we walk down the Cardo and along the side. This is some prime property here, right in the center of town. We've reached a very large public building that's the floor of which is absolutely covered with mosaics. And I think we're standing by the most impressive mosaic because most of the other mosaics here are geometric or with floral patterns, whereas this one is actually referred to the Nile mosaic. The Nile mosaic. We can actually see the Nile River flowing right through our carpet. You can see the various species of birds and animals and fish, and even the flowers. You can see the lotus flower again. That's a flower that we would never see anywhere in Israel.
Where?
Right over there.
Oh, yeah.
Lotus. Just showing we have very, very clearly Egyptian scene. There's some celebration about the high waters of the Nile, and you could see this. You could see that there's a procession that's leading into the gateways of that great city over there. And I even know what great city it is. It is in fact Alexandria. It's actually inscribed right into the mosaic. An interesting figure on the top is you see that pole with the cone on top, and obviously there's somebody etching into it. That design is called a nilometer. And basically what they're doing is they're measuring the height of the Nile. So if this is a little bit in contrast to the way nature works in Israel. In Israel, we have rain for 6 months of the year, and our crops are very dependent on that rain. Whereas in the Nile, everything depends on the rising Nile river, and the Nile is sectioned off. You can see it over here, right? You see like the little bit come over here. You know, the way they did it was they would open and close things. So in Egypt, all the agriculture is based around the Nile River. It's ebbing and flowing and high waters and low waters. And what is this doing here? It's kind of a strange scene for Tzippori. I will say that we actually have another mosaic in Israel with that same nilometer. And that is in the church of Tabcha on the Sea of Galilee. Again, it's very interesting that it's here because it's sort of disconnected from the nature around us, which leads us to believe that it's, again, a possibility of artisans that came from Egypt, and they're basically portraying this beautiful scene that they know. And that would have been, I would say, their grandest display here of these very exotic images to show the people of Tzippori what they're capable of. Actually, in fact, there is a theory that maybe this whole space is a showroom for mosaic artists. We're going to move on, okay, to look at other things. So like over here, we have some beautiful carpets with geometric designs. Over there, again, we have a Greek mythological figure, right? The centaur, half human on top, half horse on the bottom. What's he doing in Tzippori? I don't know. He's decorating a public building.
Was it a market over here?
It's possible. It's possible. This whole area, we said, is a shopping area, so it's a market area. This building itself could have been a market. Not entirely certain. Here we have some more mythological figures. In front of us, we have on a horse an Amazon warrior. So we're looking at here is a female warrior. You can see that she has one breast exposed and the other one is, according to the myth, cut off so that she could easily reach her dagger and be a very fierce warrior without being obstructed by her physiology. So she was one tough woman, or possibly two. And this is really cool.